everyone, and thank you for coming to share with me this conversation. And so I have been asked, or I've been tasked rather, to speak about effective communication, or rather the art of effective communication and presentation. And I'll speak from a point of understanding that. I'm trying to make it into a presentation mode.
The icon next to where you are dragging it, minus and plus.
Yeah, here.
No, the other one. The icon very close to it.
Oh yeah, now I can see. It was like, where has it gone? It's always down there. Now we are good to go. So in this session, we are going to look at the art of effective communication. I'm also going to engage you in the best practices for interpersonal communication. Where here, we are more concerned with communication between two people rather, or one person to the other, and in the context that you are the presenter and you have an audience to which you're communicating to. And I'm also going to highlight a little bit of how to design an effective communication strategy and your presentation skills, of course. And then, of course, we get into that session here. Now, I want to start to engage on the point of communication seen as, and it is a process where we exchange information or messages. And for us to understand here, I have used the Shannon Weaver model of communication. This was one of the oldest models of communication in 1949. But if you can see the model, then it has 3 levels where you have center of the message, then you have the channel. In here, the channel, you want to think about how am I going to send the message. You're going to see in the next model as I share on two-way process of communication. And of course, there has to be a recipient of information or that communication messages. So the elements that you are concerned about in the process of communication then becomes the source, who is the sender of the message. That is where the message originates. And so the source becomes an important person. And so as a presenter, you want to see yourself as a source. So you are very important and key in terms of construction of the message and planning how to disseminate this message. And so in this context, we are here as researchers, we are here as scholars, some of us as lecturers, some of us are going to, stand on very big platforms in audiences of magnitude audiences to make this presentation. So those are the kinds of scenarios that I want you to have. And of course, the channel, in any case, our channel of communication will be publication. You want to think about journals. You want to think about classroom situations, conferences. I also put in something that is very exciting, like if you think about the legacy media, for example, you're doing a presentation on TV or radio, or you're using social media platforms. We have seen a lot of podcasting coming into the scenario of communication. And of course, we have the receiver of message, and that would be the audience. They could be the reviewers of your communication context. They could be editors. They could also be readers in that essence. So after understanding the process of communication, then you want to think about so the art of effective communication. What is involved in the art of effective communication, rather? In this case, you will be talking about how do you become a good leader as a communicator? So because you are a communicator, you're standing in a place, in a space where you're disseminating this message, you're using this process of communication, you are a researcher, you are a scholar, how do you then communicate the information that you have? And so to make us think about how to become good communicators or effective communicators, you want to remember that it is not what you say that is important, but it's how you say it. And so it is more than just exchanging information. It is about understanding the intentions behind the information. What are you communicating? For what purpose? And I think in communication facets, we always say, have you answered the 5 W's and the H? Have you answered the question what? Have you answered the question where? who, how, in that order. And for you to answer those questions, then you are emphasizing on key points on which the facet of communication then underpin. So by doing so, you are also concerned about clearly conveying a message, and that makes the other person feel heard or understood. You want to have an interaction with your audience. You want to assess, am I speaking to these audiences? Am I making sense? Am I making them interested in the content that I'm displaying here in the process of communication? Now, remember the linear model of communication where we just have three elements. Walter Schramm in 1954 then developed further the middle on the linear model of communication and looks at communication as a two-way process, whereby we have an aspect of yes, the first facet that we saw in the linear model of communication. Of course, we have the sender of the message, we have the message itself, and we have the channel, and then we have the receiver. But in the two-way process, we are introducing other things. We are saying that the sender is going to formulate the message, and then this message is going to be directed to the receiver, but the receiver has to decode this message, which means the receiver has to make meaning out of this message. And after making meaning, which involves the process of interpretation, the receiver has to formulate what we call feedback. Now, feedback is the response to the perception, to the interpretations of the messages that have been done. And so by decoding, then again sends back the message to the sender. And so what you're seeing in a presentation process is a replica of two-way process. So there is an interaction where I construct a message and share the message. Well, how am I sharing this message? Of course, it's through a virtual channel. And we have chat, and that's where you can type your feedback. You can also use your microphone to disseminate your feedback. And so the channels of communication in a two-way model will be things like verbal communication. If I was meeting you face to face, maybe in a conference scenario, like what is going to happen in Hamburg, or it will be a telephone conversation or a voicemail or using an email, online platform, letters in the media, and the process, and the channels go on depending on the context of communication. Now, but there's something that has happened when it comes to communication. We are experiencing what we see as a disruption to technologies, according to RAD 2015. And this is just happening after other models have been developed, but the process of communication has become more complex. So in argument, we see that in this digital age, we see workplaces, we see communication shifting more towards online platform. And that is why we are able to do this today, thanks to COVID-19 and the exploration of online platforms. We are also seeing that communication has become very informal, it is faster, and it can be able to help us access global audiences, as we have participants all the way from Europe, other parts of Africa, and East Africa, West Africa. So that has made it, has been made possible by the facets of the digital communication. However, on these spaces, there are a lot of ethical concerns. We have issues of misrepresentation of information. People are making their own interpretation without really sieving and knowing the factuality about this communication. There are other issues to do with misinformation. And so this message are not conveyed succinctly. We find that people are in a rush to communicate. People are in a rush to be able to interact. We are also seeing the use of emojis, and this can play on people's feeling and reaction. For example, if you do not know how to interpret emojis, it's very likely that you're going to make the wrong interpretation. So unlike face-to-face communication, when we come to digital communication, it's very impersonal. And no matter what tool you use to communicate, you can still be able to reach a wider audience. And yes, we are saying is a very beautiful tool to use today. It can help us to reach the audiences that we are engaging with on a daily basis, on a sparse basis, but at the same time, we have to be responsible. And while I'm not going to delve a lot about ethics or etiquette on online, but one of the things to do is to check that the communication that you put online is within levels of factuality, integrity, it is ethical, it is correct information. So those are some of the things that we'll be checking. When we come to effective communication, there are best practices that we can adapt. For example, become an active listener. Here, you are required to concentrate on what is being said. By doing this, you can reiterate, for example, make small notes or summarize what is being said by the speaker. You can make verbal affirmation, especially if you have a face-to-face interaction. You can also delay your disclosure of opinion and wait until the speaker is done with the communication, because that then helps you to be able to perceive the message and make meaning out of that. There is a need for you to register your presence in the process of communication or interaction. And this means that you are paying attention. It means that you are not using your cell phones or your emails. It means that you are maintaining an eye contact for face-to-face communication processes. You are also looking at your facial expression. For example, if you're doing an interview, you're also informing the person you're interacting with of any emergencies at the beginning of the communication process, so that if you have to step out, they know exactly what is happening and they're not wondering. Because sometimes if you disconnect the communication, the speaker or the communicator can feel that they're not really appreciated, or their messages are not impacting as they're supposed to do. Then you're supposed to have empathy and compassion. So here you are guided to avoid being judgmental and having preconceived notions and prejudices about the context of communication until you understand and you make meaning out of this. You want to think about the other person. So that is the other communicating partner. Look at their personal perspective. Look at what do they appreciate, what are the challenges, what are they trying to set on the table as far as communication is concerned. And what is important also is the body language. And we know virtual communication has reduced a lot of this because we are seeing each other on the screens, and you want to think of a situation where you're having this interpersonal interaction. Non-verbal cues are very important because we can use gestures to emphasize on a point, how we sit, that is the posture, or how we stand. Really motions, the presence we talked about, but also motions, your interest, your disinterest, in this facet of communication. How do you articulate your voice, the tone you use? How do you entice the communication using facial expression? If you are using gadgets of communication, for example, if you're doing an interview on TV, how do you position yourself to look at the camera so that as a presenter, you have that confidence, you have that presence that is required on the screen? And then feedback is very important. Again, I'm taking you back to the two-way process of communication where we introduce the aspect of feedback, because feedback then creates that interaction. It creates understanding. It creates the utilization of the communication process. So you are required to be appreciative. You're required to be more positive when you're engaging in feedback. And so you reduce on the negative feedback, but you want to create a balance in that you're looking at the constructive, constructive aspects of information that you want to share with the person you're interacting with or during a presentation. You also are then required as one of the best practices to customize communication. And here is tailoring your communication to match your audience. You want to ask, who are you going to talk to? For example, it's a conference like we are in today. What kind of people are coming for this conference? These are scholars. What level of language am I going to use to these scholars? And I think one of it's an acronym, yes, but it's a strategy or criteria that you use to make communication meaningful to all audiences is the acronym KISS, and which in communication facets actually means keep it simple and sexy. And sexy here just means interesting, enticing, motivating, captivating, and all those beautiful anecdotes that you can think about. Then also ask before you speak. It is important that you understand the perspective of the context in which you are communicating before you give your opinion. And after understanding that, then you go further and ask open-ended questions. You seek clarity. And I think in the previous session, we heard that, don't be afraid of asking. Always ask. Learning never ends, and that really stimulates or develop the sense of communication that you are looking at. Building rapport, this is important. The moment of interaction does not just end there, but you want to create a relationship. You want to endear your audience. You want to be flexible. You want to be interested in the audience, and you want to be relevant in the kind of communication that you're giving. But before you reach there, you have developed your content. So you want to make this content relatable. You have understood your audience. How relevant are they? How have you packaged this content? And for me, it's more like the presentation, even things like the slides. Have you looked at your slides? Have you done the grammar check? Which images are you using? How do you coordinate the colors on the slide? What other elements are you using to deliver this information? And you could use elements like illustration, humor, anecdotes, which are very short stories that entice the conversation. You can use music, short videos, and you can use the element of storytelling. You need to be able to entice your audience by taking them into context that they can relate with, using the sense of their own stories. And for that, then you can be able to develop an effective communication strategy. Let's say it's within the organizational framework, or you are developing for your research projects. And communication strategy should be effective in a way that it guides an entire program, or it creates an intervention. It also sets the tone and direction so that all communication activities and materials work in harmony. There's that unity of desire, unity to be able to achieve a specific goal using this strategy of communication. And you can use a systematic process, look at a theory that works for you, and how are you going to implement this using communication explanation. For example, if it is a research that uses a theory of change, how are you going to make your audiences understand what a theory of change is by using a very short, straightforward structure or model of explanation. You can also develop an effective communication strategy by also looking at doing an analysis, looking at the situation or the context of communication, understanding your audience, what content are you disseminating, have you conducted an audience research that then builds into you informing what to tell this audience. Then finally, the strategy you should go to develop the strategy after creating materials, after looking at the activities that are going to be used or implemented in the projects that you're doing. I thought this was very useful for those of you who are wondering, then how do I develop a communication strategy for any activity or research projects that I am in? And so these pointers are, really steps that you can think about when you're designing communication strategy. And so you can make a brief summary of the situation analysis of what you want to communicate. Then you segment your audience. Are they students? Are they researchers? Are they reviewers? Are they politicians, or whoever that you are addressing? Then you create a theory to the strategy that you have developed. Then you set your communication objective. Then how do you achieve these objectives, which then gives you the end goal? You position for the desired change, and then you look at the benefits and messages to encourage desired change out of this process of the communication. For those of you who are in political communication, this really is some of the steps that you would want to think about. Then think about which channels am I going to disseminate? Are you going to use, less channels like print media or electronic media? Are you going to use channels like conferences, workshop, forums, etc.? and then the implementation plan, who is going to implement, so you assign responsibility. But after all this process, you want to monitor and evaluate the plan. Has it been effective? What were the loopholes? What are the gaps? How do you address these gaps as you move forward to really roll out your communication strategy? And of course, budget. Communication strategies have, have budgets, and you think about this. You want to think about your project. Does it have a communication element, and how are you going to take that? And today we have things like social media, which is part of the communication strategy. We have, budget that goes to push social media. You have budget for, legacy media coverage. You have budget for publication, budget for dissemination. All these are important aspects when you're designing a communication strategy. The last bit of my presentation, of course, is to give you a little bit of tips of presentation skills. And I think we all are presenters by the fact that we are in postgraduate, we are doing our masters, our PhDs, we have done them, we are already in the industry. But just it helps to really enhance your skills so that you retain your audiences and you make sense. So first and foremost, know your audience. I think we've talked about that. And you want to understand how, when, and why they listen to you, why they read you, why they follow you on social media. So you create messages for their consumptions, messages that understand their context. Then you want to make them, care about your message, engage them, interact them, make them laugh, make them excited, make them ask questions, provide those opportunities. Then one skill that you use in communication is when you are talking to your audience, you want to dedicate to one person. It's not a general audience. It is this one person that I'm looking at in my audience. And so this message is channeled for everyone, but everyone looking at you and listening to you feels like you are really concentrating on them. They feel special. They feel this message is directed to them. So you want to take charge by, remember the best practices that we highlighted, your presence, your rapport that you build with the audience, and etc. Then you want to learn the rules of communication. Remember, we started by designing a model, but then looking at how do we then create practices of which you can communicate better. But you're allowed to break these rules and be spontaneous, like make decisions as you present, be creative, break into a song, ask the audience to join you, ask them to clap, ask them to respond. And that is how spontaneity then makes this communication process very exciting. You will be using microphones if you are communicating to large audiences. Learn how to use the microphone, make it your mate, make it your friend, know how to, and of course, when you're having conferences and workshops, we will be assisted by technical people, but it is important to know if your microphone is working well, where do you place it, and also be yourself. I always say be authentic. If it is you as a persona, the way you stand on that podium should be able to give that authenticity. So the tips on improving your presentation, if you have been struggling with this, first thing is that most of presenters have stage frights. And this is not just for the first-time presenters, it is for everyday presenters. I remember I was a radio presenter, and every day I went to the microphone to read news. I'd have that second fright, stage fright, and then you compose yourself. You're like, okay, it is just the microphone and me, and it goes. So you need to find a way. What are your stressors? Maybe it is you need preparation for you to be able to take care of that stress. Maybe you need to hold on a pen. Maybe you want to stand in a certain position. Maybe you want to direct beyond the audience. And then be kind and confident, the way you speak to your audiences, time your presentation. The other thing is do not talk down to audiences, but make them feel invited into the conversation. Always use the social media effectively. It is important to tell people, do you have Twitter handles? Do you have Instagram? Do you have Facebook? And you post this session that is going on so that you have, you're not just interacting in this space, but you're going globally and you're engaging people in the facet of communication that you have created. We've talked about interaction and being authentic self. What makes you stand up? What makes you tick? Those are the things that will make you authentic. And for us to look at a good presentation of I'm using the 7 P's. These are some of the tricks I give for my broadcast students, but you'd want to use them. First is posture. Posture is how you're sitting or standing. Which position are you using? Are you comfortable? Try to change those positions until you feel comfortable, so that you're breathing properly, you're not cramped or slouching, or you're not, the posture is not distracting your communication process. Then number 2, the second piece, projection. Now, this is the amount of vocal energy. And if we had time, when we had face-to-face, we'd do this practically. Everyone would have a script and they will, project or read something out. And so are you using this energy appropriately for the audiences, for the content you're presenting? Is it within a room? How much articulation do you need? How much audibility do you need? Is it virtual? Is your audio, using a virtual, format working, or is it outdoors? What are some of the elements like wind that could also distract your communication? And the third P is pace. So is the delivery correct? Sometimes some of us are very fast speakers, so you want to look at that because it can impair your communication. Sometimes you're very slow that people will start sleeping before even you finish the next sentence. So you want to balance in between. Pitch is just sufficient rise and fall, so that you can follow the way I speak and the way I sound. Is it interesting? Is it too monotonous that you want to break from that and make it more relevant for the audience? You don't want to sound as a sing-so, like speaking to small children while you're speaking to PhD graduates, for example. So sing. Suitable silences which are used intelligently to separate ideas, and so that you can understand and you can also take pace. You can let your audiences fall through with you. The number 6 is pronunciation, especially colleagues that are in Europe. So you say people of color, and you go and speak in podiums like, he has an accent, she has an accent, I cannot hear what they're saying. And so you're like, oh, until today I didn't have an accent. So try to make, sometimes you have to fake it until you make it, they say, but pronunciation can make people endear to you. So it comes with the habit of reading and reading aloud. If you're reading your text or your slides before the presentation, if the names are strange, you want, like today we have a colleague from West Africa. I'm telling you, if you gave me a list of your names, I'll stumble on those names because I need time to be able to sometimes ask, how do you pronounce your name? Is it in a foreign language? For those of you who have taken, of us who have taken language or German classes, you find that we struggle so much with the words, and it is very polite, by the way, to ask a native speaker, how do you pronounce these words? Are they using unfamiliar terms? Like if you come in the Kenyan context, we have so many Swahili variations in your English. Sometimes we forget, even on international audiences, we'll be speaking in Swahili. And so it is very important to do the translation. Or here, for my audiences who do not understand Swahili, this is what I mean. And so basic phonetics is how do you sound? It's a whole class of sounding words that can help us to establish that, but practice makes perfect, right? And then number 7 is personality, and that is the total sum of all that communicates. You're concerned about the microphone, the loudspeaker, the position of the microphone. You're concerned about where do you place it, what is the right microphone, and now it's more technical of the techniques that aid in communication. But more so for me, if these things are not there, then it's just about how audible are you. How do you make yourself present, and how do you engage your audience using eye contact, using gestures or nonverbal cues, as we saw earlier. The last slide is, of course, this we might be already doing, but just if you're not doing it, you may want to remind yourself that, are you dressed for the presentation? So you need to dress to feel good, first and foremost, because if you feel good, then you feel great. If you feel great, then you are confident to be able to do your presentation. And so dress for the audience, so the venue, it depends. Like in Kenya last week, we had a lot of, Supreme Court hearings. And so people were going to, if you're going to court, of course, you had to, if you're allowed to go to court, for example, a journalist, you needed to dress the part. Or are you working for an organization that is a brand? And so you're branding yourself maybe to identify who you are, to interact with the audience because of the brand. This one is, I found it very amusing. Avoid brand new clothes. But you know that we have a habit that when you're going for a presentation, buy a new suit and you are there, suited up and ready for the presentation. But you know what is wrong with this? It is because you are not comfortable with the clothes because they are still new. You don't know if there's any trouble with these clothes. For example, if there's a tag that is peeping out of the coat, that could also really present you in a negative way. So try to use clothes, everyday clothes, but good clothes that makes you look the part. Don't try to be hip. For example, you are going for an event to meet your professors. You don't want to, in different contexts, like in European context, this is allowed. People do jeans and nice shirt and a blazer, depending on the context. But if you came in the African context, for example, and you're having an interview, for example, and you go there with your hippie dress, that could really put off the people that are going to interview you. Then keep it simple. As we said, in terms of communication keys, when it comes to dressing also, you are required to be simple. And then the last point, I'm just trying to put this bar so that we can see what it's about. And wear something that holds the lavalier. Lavalier is a microphone that is used mostly for presentations. And what you do is you want to get a shirt that has buttons, and so you count from the top, first 2, 3, or first 2 buttons. That's where you want to. That's where the lavalier can be placed. Or if you have a coat that can be that has sort of an open, so where you hook the button, that's where it can be placed, so long as it can be able to reach the sound and you can be able to project well without interfering with it. Because if you interfere with this is a very small microphone that is used for presentation. If you interfere with it, then you're having rustles, and that could also be feedback or noise in the communication. So what we have said is that, yes, for you to become an effective communicator or good presenter, you just need to understand the medium. And we said the medium doesn't really have to be maybe TV, radio, or online, virtually. It can also be audiences in a conference or in a classroom. You also need to understand the context of communication and carry a good attitude, a caring attitude, an empathetic attitude towards the audience. But remember, it is not what you say, but how you say it that is important, that will have a lasting impression to your audiences. So scholars, ladies and gentlemen, those are just a few tidbits of this workshop on effective communication and presentation that I had for this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lydia Radoli. Thank you so much for this section. It's really productive. I have been able to get some things, and also, been able to write down many points right here. And also I have a question, and I'm very sure some of us, other people also have some questions to ask. And right in the chat box, I can see that some scholars have dropped their questions right here, and I'll just read them out while you help us in answering them. So the first person said, please, can we get your slide?
The first person asking a slide or the question.
Oh, no.
That's right. I'll be able to share it.
It's a request.
with the conference organizer, so that it can be shared for the purpose of sharing the tips together.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Bravo asked a question. He said, kindly explain more on talk to one person skill.
One person skill? Oh, yes. Yeah. Talking to one person. So this is what I mean. Most likely, in most audiences, and in most two-way communication, you're having an audience. So let's say you are in a classroom. Let's use the example of a classroom. And so you have a classroom of 30 students and you want to communicate to them. So what you're saying is you're making this message very personal so that you do not generalize the message. You do not talk to them as a group, but you can personalize the message. For example, for me, what I do is I would want to know the name. So I quickly get to know the name. So like, for example, I'll say Margaret, and I'll ask Margaret to interact with her. So for example, I'll tell Olademeji, there goes the names, Olademeji to share an experience, and throughout the session, I'll remember that experience so that when I use it as an example, Olademeji feels that this experience that he has shared in a classroom situation is going to impact other communicators in that sense. If I was doing a radio broadcast, which is an extreme example for this context, then what I do, I don't say listeners, I say my dear listener. You know, it's like my sister, it's like my friend, it's like my mother, it's like my family member. And I say, dear listener, you know, I'm delighted to have you on board. You know, you are special by joining me on this forum. So if it was on an academic audience, you would make them feel that they are very useful colleagues whose discourses and conversation are important for this particular communication sense. And so you invite them to be players and participants with you and co-creators in the communication process.
Thank you for that. Well, I believe communication is very, very important and it's key also to our lives. So it's very important to understand every part of communication. Like while communicating, you need to understand, I'm just like adding to this actually, like you need to understand what the sender is actually giving and what the receiver is also like trying to get from the sender. My question is from that part, but before asking my question, Mr. Bravo also asked another question. Yeah, he said, avoid new clothes. I guess you also avoid too old clothes, right?
Definitely you want to avoid old clothes, because then that puts you off, like you will be looking haggard, tired, not ordered, not organized, and people will be concentrating on your clothes instead of concentrating on the message. So you want to look sharp, and you don't want to overdo it. And of course, we talked about the disadvantages of having old clothes, rather new clothes, but having old clothes is actually a no. And if you know, like if you come back to the context of Africa, you may find that people generally don't buy new clothes, but they have clothes that are, you know, are sensible. So what you want to do is make sure that your clothes are cleaned, they are ironed, especially your shoes. Even ladies, we tend to dress so smartly, but we forget to look at our shoes. How are they looking? How are the soles? About our hair, is it neat? How are our faces looking? Do not have too much makeup, things like that. Because what happens is people tend to concentrate on these facets: old clothes, bad hair, bad shoes, socks peeping outside, and so you find that instead of them concentrating on the message, they'll be concentrating on that. And you want to avoid as many distractions as you can in the communication process.
Okay, that's so great. Mr. Bravo, I believe you're clear with the answer. Okay, all right. So to my own question, actually, according to Peter Drucker, one thing that I learned is that communication is to hear what is being said. That's the content. And in a situation, I just have to write this down here, whereby a sender sent a message and the receiver didn't get any feedback. So what are the steps that the sender needs to take in this part of situation?
Could you come again, please?
When a message is being sent by a sender and the receiver didn't get the feedback. So what should the sender do?
So this is the process. You have the sender, you have the message. Let's use the linear model, it's so easy. So you have the send of the message, you have the message, and you have the receiver. So the process has to go two ways. So the receiver receives the message, does the interpretation, and creates meaning, and send back feedback. Like, for example, what is happening on the chat, you guys are sending back feedback because you have been following the process. And if you did not understand the message, and so you do not have feedback, likely you may want to ask for more clarification, more elaboration, so that the sender can resend the message. What I'm saying is that this can happen in interpersonal communication and also in spaces where there is room for feedback. And if there is no feedback, it could mean two things. Because I could talk like this and there's no feedback. It happens. In most communication, it happens. So it could mean two things. It could mean either your audiences did not understand the communication. Two, they are understood, they are satisfied, and that's okay. Three, you did not provide enough moments for interaction so that they can give the feedback. Number three, they had no way of providing feedback. For example, if the chat is disabled in this interaction, we won't be able to get feedback. If the microphones are not enabled, if we do not have a moderator, we may not be able to give feedback. I can go further and say, in a conference room, in a hall, if you're giving a presentation, you may just go there as a speaker, but there's no, there's no, what do you call this, question and answer session, or there is no discussion session where people have then freedom to give feedback of the communication we just made. And that happens in different contexts. For example, in a church audience, sometimes we don't give feedback. In parliamentary audiences, we do not, court sessions, sometimes only specific people can allowed to talk. So in such contexts, you understand that the communication is one way, yeah, it's linear. So it's just from the sender to the receiver, and that ends there. But when we have another layer and there is an allowance for feedback, it should be encouraged that communicators need to allow feedback, so that at the end of the communication process, or at the end of the presentation, there is a feeling that we understood the communication and we got value out of this communication. Otherwise, it will be what we have learned from our courts here. We call it hot air. Nothing said, nothing taken in or out.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lydia. I'm very clear about that right now. Okay, so we have another question right in the chat box. Mr. Kosive Elom asked the question. He said, talk to one person skill is just used to avoid the stress of speaking in front of an audience, right? And he moved further by saying this problem depends on the personality of the speaker. I don't know if you get that right.
Not really. I think the context of talk to one person, what my colleague here interprets is not what I mean. What I mean is make every person feel special. It is very difficult in a large audience, but you can make every person feel special by the way you express, the kind of words you use, yeah? And so that the words you use are more inviting, they are more, sort of warm, they are more encouraging, they are more constructive, other than, generalizing or just, like, for lack of a better example, for example, talking to sheep. If you talk to sheep, you just talk to sheep. But if you talk to human beings, you want to make those human beings feel like, oh, that message is meant for me. And pastors do this, Pentecostal pastors, they are very good at that. You sitting there and they're talking, they're like, that message is directed to me. That's what I mean. I mean that people need to feel that this message is constructed especially for me, because as you speak, you're speaking to things that are relevant to each individual in this audience. Why? Because you did your audience research, you already understood the context of your presentation, you are prepared enough, you are also handling the interaction, you're not leaving anyone behind, you're not leaving anyone out, you're not prejudiced, you're not discriminatory in your interaction with the audience. So that is, every person leaving that forum is feeling like that speaker was speaking to me. me, I could relate with the speaker. That's what I mean. Not looking at Eniola and I don't leave myself from Eniola. That's a different case. That yes could be avoiding the stress or managing the stress. And another way to manage stress that we have seen is you're asked to look at the farther end of the room if there's a wall and assume you're speaking to no one. Or sometimes they tell you, assume that everyone in the hall is naked so that you are the only person with the clothes. And that one gives you a lot of confidence. So there are very many strategies, especially for very anxious speakers, that you can master. But for me, what has worked, and what I tell my students is that if you are an anxious speaker and your presentation is way off, try to get enough time with the content of presentation, practice before and in front of a mirror. And or use your computer to record and go through that presentation. And I think for those of you who have defended PhDs, this is actually what we do. Like 1 week with your material, you are looking at that material, you are timing that material, you are cramming part of that material, you are internalizing the material so that when you go to deliver that material, the confidence is there. Why? Because you knew the content, because you prepared, and because you knew your audience.
That was really awesome. Preparation is very important before going out to speak to the audience. Very important. Thank you so much, Dr. Lydia. So we have more questions. It's actually like a direct questions. I got this, and we have more of the questions right here. So I'll just read them out. So the first one is, what are the problems that you see when it comes to the digital age and communication? I mean, like furthermore, I mean the influence of social media on communication. That's the first question.
Yeah. Now we have to be specific. Which kind of communication are we talking about? So let's concentrate on what is today. Today we said we are talking about presentation, and it's more interpersonal communication, and that's communication between two people. And now we have social media, and I want to use the expression noise. In communication, when we say noise, is any interference that comes in the process of communication and it distracts the receiver of the message from understanding, interpreting the information or communication per se. So social media is very useful. And I think in one of the slides I say, when you're doing a presentation, you can incorporate social media facets, you can put links and etc. But in virtual communication like today, where I'm not seeing you guys on camera, so I'm assuming you are really enjoying my presentation. But otherwise, I know some of you are on your phones, you're checking emails, you're chatting with your girlfriends and boyfriend and husbands and wife. And that is just one thing that we cannot control about social media, that it interferes with other forms of communication and sort of distracts the flow of communication. It also interferes with the interaction, so that the receiver of the message sometimes may have multiple sources of information that is coming in. I'm speaking to you, actually I was speaking to you, a phone is ringing, I'm speaking to you, a Facebook message is coming in. So the strategy is just to, like one of the slides I say, stay off the cell phone, stay off social media, so that you can be able to concentrate on the communication. But to expand that question, and I think it's a very important question, is we are using social media, digital spaces in communication. And we are interacting with social media so many times that I think research has been done that we can stay away for 7 minutes, and those are the people who can hold it long. 7 minutes before we go back to check our phones. And we are also getting a lot of information. So there's a lot of explosion of information that is coming on digital spaces. And what we have noticed is that the ethical issues on communications are being affected by social media or digital spaces. And so that is a disadvantage. While we know that these facets are very important, for example, connecting many people, wider audiences, globalized audiences, it is also disadvantageous because sometimes we have fake news, misinformation, misrepresentation that is coming in these social media spaces. We have cyberbullying that has become an issue of mental health and also sort of issues to do in my ethics class. We are also dealing with issues to do like pornography, mostly child pornography, issues to do with vulgar content, issues to do with extreme content like gory images, bloody images, because these are not people who are trained in journalism, in media per se, in communication per se, and when they take these videos impromptu, they post them on social media. So we are interacting with a lot of content that needed to be sifted. There is need for gatekeeping, and so that we only disseminate content that is ethical within spaces. And just off my head, those are some of the challenges that are really coming with social media. And what else is because of interpersonal communication. Remember, before the social media, we could create rapport. We could actually concentrate on the communication. We could create bonds and friendship just through the process of communication. But this has been affected with social media because people are engaged so much on their gadgets that they have forgotten human interaction. And that is it's unfortunate, because within human interaction, then we can bond closely. We can help find solutions without having to Google these solutions. And yes, Eniola, those are some of the disadvantages and challenges of social media within the space of communication.
All right, Dr. Lydia, thank you for that as well. I believe it's quite clear. And we have another question here. So the second question asked by Tim Person is said, what practical ways can young researchers or career starters hone their presentation skill?
Yes, the best way is at the level, whatever level you are in your studies. And I actually tell my students, from undergraduate to postgraduate students, that it is never too early to start. Too early to start engaging in forums like that. Go for conferences and put yourself outside there to be able to practice, to hone your skills in presentation. And then also take on challenges. If you find it's very difficult to present, to be in a forum where we have many people, just take it as a challenge that you want to try out and to improve your skills. But the other thing is, personal commitment. For example, if I'm struggling with English as a language, we talked about pronunciation, phonetics, audibility. These are things that you can practice by yourself and prepare slides and just go through these slides. And I can also give you tips that we use in broadcast. In broadcast mostly is, of course, reading. For example, you can start by reading the newspaper or reading publications. So read the newspaper more consciously, get those hard words and try to get the way they sound. Listen to radio. For example, I grew up listening to BBC because I wanted to become a broadcaster. And that really helps, because when you listen to media, these people are professionally trained and they are trained about presentation skills. Also emulate some of your presenters, for example, TED Talks. That they have very good communicating and presenting skills that you want to emulate. You may also look at the professors in the university that are really doing a great job at that, and learn from your peers. And I think through that you can be able to hone your own skills as a presenter. But if you're not publishing, then you need to do conferences so that you can get yourself in these spaces where there's a chance to communicate to an international audience.
Important. That's very, very important. Like just to learn and read. It's so important. Thank you so much for that as well. Okay, so we have two more questions right here. So one of it is, how do I use communication to manage conflict at work?
Yes. We have what we call crisis communication as an approach to communication that deals with communication within difficult situation, or communication that is need to disperse tension or conflict. And so there are steps to crisis communication. While crisis communication has different levels, but what I say is at workplaces, there are going to be very many conflicts. Sometimes conflicts come because we do not agree on our opinions. Sometimes conflicts come because of the bureaucracies, the top-down level within the institutions where you work for. And so one of the easiest ways just to go through the right channels of communication. For example, if you are conflicted and you are seeking to find redress to the situation, maybe the first step is first recognize and identify the source of conflicts, or who are you conflicting with, and then find an amicable solution to be able to dissolve the conflict without really going to high levels of redress, which could also mean show cause, maybe dismissal at the organization, things like that. But what could help us is effective communication. For example, seek clarity when you feel that you are misunderstood because of communication. So you seek clarity, and one of the ways to seek clarity is definitely asking questions. And what I've also helped is to stand to your authentic self, or to stand by your truth. So for example, if you feel that this is the opinion that I want to stand with, then you need to stand by that opinion, and then in a way that is constructive, you can endear people to understand your point of view. But you also need to be very realistic and know that not everyone is going to follow your point of view. So diversity, to understand that there's a diversity in views, so that as you engage in a communication process, you are very constructive, you are very aware and open-minded, so that you do not get into conflicting situation. And of course, there are other methods of redress that you can seek, but I think effective communication, speaking in a way that you can be understood, or sometimes writing in clear ways, use official means of communication. For example, do not use WhatsApp to communicate official information. Always insist on using emails, because then that one sort of it's something that you can fall back if you are in a conflicting situation and things like that. So most organizations have their own strategies in which to follow to redress conflict, which you may want to engage with. But also as human beings, we know that we do not have to go beyond what is necessary at conflict, but you can find an amicable way to talk out and find solution to that. And by being clear in our communication, intentional, and also very compassionate with the people that we are communicating with.
Thank you so much. Okay, in addition, I actually learned something that it's very good to build a very good sense of listening when it comes to working with a group of people. It's very important. And thanks for that. Like you mentioned, it's very good to also like send an email and not to chat on WhatsApp when it comes to something that is official. So thanks for the point. They are very, very productive and very valuable. So the last question, we move to the last question. The person also asked, they said, many Europeans think Africans are too loud or too fast when we speak. So how do we manage our accent during communication?
Wow, this is interesting. And sometimes you find that it's for those of us who have been in foreign context, it becomes very difficult to make non-Africans understand how we talk. For example, East Africans speak differently from West Africans and South African, and the list goes on. But what I've found, and I use an example that is very, very, very vivid to me, is I studied in the UK for my master's. And what the mistake that most African scholars did, that you land in the UK, the next time you have an accent. So you speak with a UK accent, and you go to the streets of London and you're speaking with that accent, and they're looking at you like, really? So for me, remaining your authentic self, but trying to make them understand. So that's speaking slowly. Sometimes we talked about phonetics, sometimes just learning the right pronunciation, because if they say you're very fast, then go at a pace that you can easily understand, because they're also taking time. Then I realized in Germany, sometimes you're speaking English, they are translating it in their mind into German before they respond. So if you are speaking slowly, it's quite easy for them to catch up with you rather than when you're speaking very fast. And sometimes I am very unapologetic. It is my accent. It is my concept. Maybe you are a German and you have an accent. I won't blame you for that because that's your context. Sometimes it is just making people understand that you're very proud of your concept, your accent, or your context as an African person, or people of color in contexts that are not. And so they come to accept you the way you are, other than every time you are feeling, oh my goodness, I'm not going to speak because I don't sound right. But as a professional, I think you need to invest in presentation and communication communication skills. The way you sound is very important, because you'll be communicating not to your context most of the time, but to international context. And so to say, that should be a motivation. If you feel that you're speaking too loud or too quick, or whatever it is they're saying, then it should be your motivation to stand out. And you can also stand out as a speaker by a few tips that we've shared here, and more that you can find in a very effective. And I found YouTube very effective. For example, you can look at people, the way they do their presentations, and just purpose to learn from that. And learning never stops. I mean, we learn every day. I teach presentation skills in my class, and one or twice I have very students that can really articulate themselves, and I pose like, wow, are you still a student? And you see, you can still learn from them to articulate, if that's what you're looking for. So look for inspiration from speakers, from your mentors, from people who sound like you want to sound.
That's so great. Thank you so much, Dr. Lydia. This is really a tremendously powerful section. Like, I have really learned a lot, and I believe with all of this as well, it's going to help me to improve my communication skills.
Thank you, Eniola. It was a pleasure. And welcome. Thank you, everyone,
thank you,
for enjoying this session with me and for your questions and interaction. Thank you.